Hello, my name is Thamara Faustine and I'm going to present you a brief explanation about the late Victorian literature. So let's get started. The Victorian era occurred during the reign of Queen Victoria, that is from 1837 until 1901. This period was marked by many important social and historical changes that altered the nation in many ways. For example, the women's roles now being spotted and recognized, and novels become the means where the domestic confinement of women were questioned. And the British Empire expanded exponentially, and technological and industrial progress helped Britain become the most powerful country in the world. Some events that took place in this era are: the first is a huge growth in population. So during this era, the population of England more than doubled from 14 million to 32 million. There were also some significant improvement in technology. So the Victorian era slightly overlaps with the Britain Industrial Revolution, which saw big changes to the way the people lived, worked, and traveled. This improvement in technology offered a lot of opportunity for the people in England, but also represented a major upheaval in regards to how people lived their lives and interacted with the world. And other characteristics of Victorian era are changing worldviews. So, in addition to the major development in technology, there were emerging scientific beliefs like Charles Darwin theories of evolution, and those things were changing how people in England thought about themselves and how they interacted with the world around them. Most notably, a lot of people were distancing themselves from the church. And finally, there were the poor condition for the working class. So the industrial revolution led to the distance between the haves and haves not growing at really high rate. And a lot of people, especially artists and writers, felt obligated to speak out against what they believed to be societal injustice. So in this era, there's happened the poverty, injustice, starvation, and slums that happen in the working class. For me, it just meant to give you a sense of what was going on and why that would have inspired the writers of the time to write what they do. So the Victorian literature can be divided into two periods, that is, the High Victorian literature and the Late Victorian literature. But I will give more explanation about the Late Victorian literature. So the common themes in this era are the critique of industrialization, the critique of deterioration of the rural lifestyle, the conflicts between classes, women's rights, and increasing the society morality by realism. So, in 1859, Charles Darwin had published the non-fiction work on the origin of species by means of natural selection, and Friedrich Engels with his condition of the working classes in England. It has all changed the way the Victorians thought about themselves and about the world. The Charles Darwin makes the historians, philosophers, and scientists were all beginning to apply the idea of evolution to new areas of study of the human experience. Traditional conception of man's nature and place in the world were as a consequence under the threat. So the fiction and novel in this era. The late Victorian fiction may express doubts and uncertainties, but in aesthetic terms it displays a new sophistication and self-confidence. The late Victorian novels were more complex than the high Victorian novels because they reflected an inner struggle to conquer the flaws of human nature through effort and virtue. In the 1880s, a gap started to open between popular fiction and the literary or art novel. The flowering of realist fiction was also accompanied by a revival of its opposite, the romance. And in the 1860s, it has produced a new subgenre, the sensationalist novel, seen as its best in the work of Wilkie Collins, and it was based on the life of middle class. That is, The Woman in White and The Moonstone are the Collins' famous sensational novels. Then there are also the Gothic novels and romance, and also the utopian fiction, and also the science fiction by H.G. Wells, which make it possible to speak of a full scale of romance revival. So continue, it is there are also the realism continue to flourish, however sometimes encouraged by the example of European realists and naturalist novelists. Both George Moore and George Gissing were influenced by Emile Zola. Two both also reacted against him. In the 1890s, it saw the intense concern with the social role of women reflected in the new woman fiction of Grant Allen, The Woman Who Did, and Sarah Grant with the Heavenly Twins, and George Egerton with the Keynotes. The heroines of such texts breached conventional assumptions by supporting women's suffrage, smoking, adopting rational dress, and rejecting traditional double standards in sexual behavior. The Rudyard Kipling and his short story Kim, that took place in India, pointed to the larger historical process of colonialism happening at the time. It was in 1877 that Queen Victoria became the Empress of India. However, the greatest novelist of this generation was Thomas Hardy. He was influenced by both the romanticism of the earlier era and the social commentary of Dickens. His first published novel, The Desperate Remedies, appeared in the 1871 and was followed by 13 more before he abandoned prose to publish only poetry. His major fiction consists of the tragic novels of rural lives. So, in these novels, his brilliant evocation of the landscape and people of his fictional Wessex is combined with a sophisticated sense of the age of modernism. In the poetry of this era, there was a group of writers and artists, the pre-rap Hellite Brotherhood, of which Dante Gabriel Rossetti and his sister Christina Rossetti were part of it. Their aim was to replace the academic approaches to art with the more natural approaches taken before the Italian Renaissance. For the examples, the Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market, which recounts how a woman is seduced into eating beautiful fruit sold by goblins, and how her sister saved her life after she got sick. And the Victorian theater. So the theater became an extremely popular form of entertainment for all social classes during this era because of the interest of Queen Victoria in the drama. So the plays usually had a strong comedic element, both high and low, and the plots were full of mistaken identities, coincidences, and mistimings. Oscar Wilde was the leading dramatist of the late Victorian period, with one of the few great high-end comedies in English. His masterpiece is The Importance of Being Earnest, that is a satiric reflection of the time. The last is the Victorian literary comedy. So the Victorian literature began with such humorous books as Sartorus and the Pickwick Papers. Despite the crisis of faith, the condition of England question, and the age of modernism, this note was sustained throughout the century. The comic novels of Dickens and Thackeray, the quips, sketches, and the light verse of Thomas Hood and Douglas Jerrold, the nonsense of Edward Lear and Lewis Carroll, and the humorous light fiction of Jerome K. Jerome and George Grossmith and his brother Whedon Grossmith are proof that this age, so often remembered for its gloomy rectitude, may in fact have been the greatest era of comic writing in English literature. and these are my references. I'll put in the description box, so let's just check it out. So that's all for today's video about the late Victorian literature. I'm Thamara Faustine. Thank you for your attention and have a good day.